Imagine walking into a bank you own, only to be treated like a criminal. That's exactly what happened to Nina Carter, a woman whose success story had inspired thousands, until one ordinary afternoon turned into an unforgettable lesson for everyone who dared to underestimate her. But before we dive into this shocking encounter, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Tales Live, because stories like this remind us that respect has no color, and kindness always comes back around. It was a bright Friday afternoon in Atlanta when Nina Carter stepped out of her black Tesla and walked into Crestfield National Bank, the very institution she had built from the ground up. Dressed in a cream suit, her confidence carried the quiet authority of someone who had fought for every inch of success. Her bank wasn't just a business, it was a legacy, one she had built after years of struggling against the odds. But today, Nina wasn't here as the CEO. She had come simply as a customer planning to make a quick withdrawal before her next meeting. The security guard at the door nodded politely, unaware that the woman who had just walked in signed his paycheck every month. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and coffee. A young teller at the front desk with neatly braided hair greeted her warmly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" Nina smiled. "I'd like to make a withdrawal. $50,000. The teller's eyes widened slightly at the amount, but she didn't say a word, only nodding as she began to type into her computer. But a few minutes later, her expression shifted, hesitation, confusion, and then something else. Fear. I'm sorry, ma'am, but your account shows some discrepancies. I'll need to call the branch manager." Nina frowned. "Discrepancies? That's impossible. I'm here every week." Before she could say more, a woman in a sharp navy suit appeared from behind the glass doors. Her name was Karen Blake, the newly appointed branch manager who had started just a few weeks ago. She didn't recognize Nina, nor did she seem particularly interested in doing so. Her smile was forced. "Good afternoon. I'm the manager here. I understand there's an issue?" The teller explained quickly, and Karen's eyes narrowed at Nina. $50,000 is quite a lot of money. May I ask why you need it?" Nina blinked, caught off guard by the tone. "Why I need my own money? I think that's my business." Karen's lips tightened. "Well, ma'am, we have to follow procedures. Do you have proof of account ownership? Perhaps your employer could verify this." Nina's brows lifted slightly. "My employer?" she repeated, her voice cool. "Yes," Karen said. "We can't just hand out that kind of cash without proper clearance. I'm sure you understand." The few customers nearby were starting to glance over, sensing tension. Nina inhaled deeply. "I see," she murmured. "Would you like my ID?" Karen crossed her arms. "You could have printed a fake one for all I know. We've had fraud cases recently." "I think it's best if I call the police to verify this." The words hung heavy in the air. The teller's eyes widened. "Ms. Blake, maybe that's not necessary." "No," Karen snapped, her voice rising. "It's necessary." Nina looked at her, calm yet sharp as glass. "You're calling the police." "On me?" Karen shrugged. "If you're legitimate, you'll have nothing to worry about." Nina's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down briefly. 3 missed calls from her assistant and a text from her CFO. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Need you online?" She smiled faintly. "Perfect timing." She turned her gaze back to Karen. "All right," she said softly. "Call them." As the manager walked away, Nina leaned against the counter, watching the room. Whispers spread. A few people stared. Others avoided eye contact. The irony wasn't lost on her. The CEO of the entire banking network, standing in her own lobby, treated like an intruder. 5 minutes later, 2 officers entered, hands resting near their belts. Karen met them eagerly, pointing. "That's her. She's trying to withdraw funds that don't belong to her." Nina didn't move. One of the officers approached. "Ma'am, can we see some ID?" Nina handed it over silently. He examined it, then froze. His eyes widened slightly, flicking toward Karen. "Ma'am, this says she's—" But before he could finish, Nina pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and said calmly, "Elaine, I'm at the downtown branch. Could you please remind your staff who signs their paychecks?" Silence followed. Then the officer's radio crackled. The voice of the regional director came through. "Do not detain her. That's our CEO." Karen's face drained of color. For a long second, no one in the bank moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the nervous tap of Karen's heel against the tile. The officers exchanged glances, their postures shifting instantly from suspicion to embarrassment. One of them cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, we weren't aware." Nina didn't respond immediately. She simply took her ID back, her calmness cutting through the tension like glass through air. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but commanding. "I believe there's been a mistake, one that goes beyond this single transaction." Her words carried the weight of someone used to being heard. Karen stammered, her earlier arrogance melting away. I had no idea, Ms. Carter. I was just following protocol." "We have to be careful these days." Nina raised a hand gently, silencing her. "Protocol is good," she said. "Prejudice is not." A hush fell over the lobby. Even the customers stopped pretending not to listen. The young teller at the counter looked mortified. "Ms. Carter, I am so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" Nina gave her a small, forgiving smile. "You did your job. You treated me with respect. That's all I ever ask from anyone." Her gaze, however, returned to Karen, steady and piercing. "You, on the other hand, made an assumption the moment I walked in. You didn't ask for ID because you suspected fraud. You asked because you didn't believe someone who looked like me could own an account that large." Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face had gone pale, her confidence shattered. The customers were now murmuring among themselves, realizing who Nina really was. "That's Nina Carter? The CEO?" someone whispered. "She owns the entire bank chain," another said. Karen's composure broke entirely. "Ms. Carter, please, I didn't mean any disrespect." Nina's tone remained steady. "You did, but what matters now is how we fix it." She turned to the officers, offering a polite nod. "Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your professionalism." They quickly excused themselves, more than ready to escape the embarrassment. Nina walked slowly toward the manager's office, her heels echoing sharply on the marble floor. "Follow me," she said to Karen, who hesitated before obeying. Inside, the office was pristine, organized, polished, but cold. Nina sat behind the desk as if she owned it, which in truth she did. Karen stood awkwardly, wringing her hands. "Ms. Carter, please, I'll do anything to make this right." Nina's expression didn't soften. "Anything? Good. Then listen carefully." She leaned forward slightly. "This is not just about you. It's about the culture we build here. When you assumed I was a fraud, you told everyone watching that people who look like me don't belong in this space. You told every customer, every employee that success has a color." Karen's eyes filled with tears. I understand," she whispered. "Do you?" Nina asked quietly. "Because understanding means changing." She stood, straightened her jacket, and pulled out her phone again. "Elaine," she said to her assistant, "schedule a staff-wide inclusion training. Every branch, every manager, starting next week." She glanced at Karen. "And make sure the downtown branch leads it." Karen nodded quickly, shame written all over her face. Nina's voice softened, but only slightly. "I don't want you fired. I want you educated. Prejudice can't be punished away, it has to be confronted." Karen looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you, Ms. Carter, I promise I'll do better." Nina gave her a brief nod. "You'd better, because the next woman who walks in here looking like me might not be as patient." As Nina turned to leave, the young teller from earlier appeared at the door. "Ms. Carter," she said hesitantly, "if it means anything, seeing you handle this with grace, it gives me hope." Nina smiled, genuinely this time. "Then that means today wasn't wasted." She handed the teller her withdrawal slip again. "Let's finish this properly, shall we?" The teller beamed, wiping away a tear, and processed the withdrawal herself. A few minutes later, Nina walked out of the bank, the envelope of cash in her hand, her head held high. The customer stood aside respectfully. Even Karen followed her to the door, whispering a shaky, "I'm sorry," one last time. Nina paused at the exit, glancing back one final time. "Don't be sorry," she said softly. "Be better." Then she walked into the sunlight, her reflection shining against the glass doors of the very empire she had built with her own hands. And this time everyone watched her not with suspicion, but with awe. The story of what happened that afternoon spread faster than wildfire. By evening, social media was flooded with clips taken by customers who had witnessed the event. Hashtags like Respect Over Assumption and Nina Carter began trending, with people praising the CEO's calm yet powerful response. News outlets picked it up within hours, calling it a masterclass in dignity and leadership. But while the world was applauding her, Nina wasn't celebrating. She sat alone in her corner office that night, the city light stretching beneath her like a sea of stars, replaying the day in her mind. She thought of Karen's trembling voice, the fear in the teller's eyes, and how quickly a simple withdrawal had become a statement about equality. For Nina, it wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about reflection. She had worked her entire life to build something meaningful, something that would outlive prejudice. Yet moments like these reminded her how fragile progress could be. Her assistant, Elaine, entered quietly, holding a tablet. "The press wants a statement, ma'am. CNN, Business Daily, even the Times." Nina leaned back, rubbing her temples. "And what do they want me to say? That I was disrespected? That I proved them wrong?" Elaine hesitated. "They want to know how you stayed calm when most people would have exploded." Nina gave a small, weary smile. "Because anger gives them power. Calm takes it back." She stood and walked toward the glass wall overlooking the skyline. "Tell them I don't want this to be about me. I want it to be about the system that allows bias to hide behind procedure." Elaine nodded slowly, admiration in her eyes. "You always turn pain into purpose." Nina smiled faintly. "That's the only way I know how to survive." The next morning, Nina arrived at the same branch, again without an announcement, but this time, everyone recognized her immediately. The entire staff stood nervously by the entrance, waiting for her. Karen looked visibly exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying. "Ms. Carter," she said softly, "thank you for coming back." Nina's gaze softened. "I came because real change doesn't happen from an office. It starts where the mistake began." She gathered everyone into the lobby, even the security guards and cleaning staff. "Yesterday," she began, "wasn't about embarrassment. It was about awareness. Many of you saw what happened. Some of you didn't say anything. Not because you agreed, but because silence is safer. That's what we're changing." The room was still. "I built this bank to give opportunities to people who were told they didn't belong. Every single one of you is part of that mission. But we can't claim to serve the community if we carry the same bias that once shut us out." Karen's voice trembled. "Miss Carter, I can't apologize enough. I judged you by your skin before I saw your worth. And that's something I'll never forgive myself for." Nina stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then start forgiving yourself by learning. And make sure the next person you meet gets treated with the same dignity you expect for yourself." A few employees wiped tears from their eyes. Nina continued, "We're going to introduce a new initiative. It's called Empathy in Action. Every employee will spend one day each month volunteering in underserved communities. Because you can't truly respect what you've never understood." The room erupted in quiet applause, sincere, emotional, and filled with a sense of renewal. Even Karen clapped, tears streaming freely now. As Nina left the branch, reporters crowded outside, cameras flashing. One shouted, "Ms. Carter, do you have a message for the people who discriminated against you?" Nina smiled for the first time that morning. "Yes," she said. "Never let judgment blind you to greatness. It might be standing right in front of you." The crowd murmured, inspired by her grace. That clip went viral instantly, viewed millions of times across platforms. Students quoted it in essays. Motivational speakers repeated it in talks. And for the first time, Nina's name wasn't just associated with business. It became a symbol of resilience and respect. That night, as she drove home, she thought of her mother, how she used to say, "When they look down on you, don't fight to prove them wrong. Rise so high that they have to look up just to see you." Nina smiled softly at the memory, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The world could misunderstand her. People could underestimate her. But she knew who she was, and that was power no one could ever deny. 2 weeks after the incident, Crestfield National Bank hosted its annual board meeting at the downtown headquarters. It was a grand event. Executives, investors, and directors gathered under crystal chandeliers, dressed in sharp suits, sipping espresso as they discussed profits and projections. But that morning something was different. The usual chatter was replaced by an air of curiosity. Everyone had seen the viral footage. Everyone had read the headlines about how their own CEO had been denied a withdrawal at her own bank. Now they waited to see how Nina Carter would address it. When she finally entered the room, the conversation stopped. She was poised, confident, and calm as ever, her presence commanding attention without a word. "Good morning," she began, setting her bag on the long mahogany table. "Before we start with numbers, I want to talk about something that can't be measured. Respect." The board members glanced at one another uneasily. Nina continued, "Many of you know what happened at our downtown branch. I won't repeat it. But I will say this, it exposed a truth we can no longer ignore. Bias doesn't just exist outside our walls, it exists within them." Her voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. "We've built a successful institution, yes, but if our employees don't embody the values we stand for, then we've failed no matter how high the profits climb." One of the older directors cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Nina, this was an isolated incident. The manager's been reprimanded. I don't see why it needs to become a company-wide matter." Nina turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Because it wasn't isolated, Thomas. It's a symptom, and pretending otherwise is how companies die from the inside out." Her words silenced the room again. "We don't just handle people's money. We handle their trust. And that means every single person who walks through our doors deserves dignity, whether they're wearing a suit or overalls, whether they have $10 or 10 million. She paused, letting her words sink in. "That's why I'm launching a new initiative today, the Human Equity Program. It's not just training, it's transformation. Every employee, from executives to janitors, will participate. Our hiring, promotion, and leadership processes will be reviewed to ensure fairness. Because equality isn't just moral, it's smart business." A few people nodded slowly, inspired despite themselves. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing the world they knew was about to change. Nina smiled faintly. "And for those who think this doesn't matter, let me show you what happens when we choose integrity over ignorance." She turned on the projector, and a slideshow filled the screen. Photos of customers from all walks of life. Small business owners, single mothers, immigrants, veterans, all people whose stories had been uplifted by Crestfield Bank. "These," she said, pointing, "are the people we serve. They trust us not just with their savings, but with their dreams. So I ask you, how can they believe in us if we can't even believe in each other?" When she finished, the room erupted in applause, slow at first, then building to a standing ovation. Even Thomas the skeptic clapped reluctantly, his expression softening. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "And it's a damn good one." Nina smiled, grateful but composed. "Good. Then let's make sure this lesson doesn't fade once the headlines do." As the meeting ended, several investors approached her privately, praising her leadership and vision. "You turned a scandal into a statement," one said. "That's what real power looks like." Nina thanked them politely, but deep down she wasn't thinking about power. She was thinking about purpose. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the downtown branch again, the atmosphere felt different. Customers greeted her warmly, and employees smiled genuinely this time, not out of obligation but respect. Karen, the manager, approached nervously, holding a folder. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I finished drafting the new diversity policy for staff training. Would you like to review it?" Nina nodded approvingly. "Good work, Karen. I'm proud of how you've handled this." Karen's eyes brightened, relief flooding her face. "Thank you, ma'am. I meant what I said before. I'll never let something like that happen again." Nina smiled. "That's how change starts. Not by being perfect, but by being willing to do better." As she exited the building, the sun dipped low, painting the city in hues of gold and amber. She paused at the curb, watching people pass by, bankers, baristas, delivery drivers, all chasing dreams of their own. "Respect," she murmured almost to herself. "It's the currency that never loses value." And with that, she stepped into her car, ready to turn one bad experience into a nationwide movement that would redefine what leadership and kindness truly meant. A month later, the world still hadn't stopped talking about Nina Carter. News anchors called her the woman who turned discrimination into transformation. Universities invited her to speak about leadership and empathy. Her story was even featured in a national magazine under the headline, "Grace in the Face of Bias." But to Nina, the real victory wasn't in the fame. It was in the quiet, steady change she began to see every day. Inside her banks, employees from different backgrounds worked together with renewed purpose. Customers, especially women and people of color, wrote letters thanking her for standing up with dignity. And at the downtown branch, the same lobby that had once echoed with doubt now rang with laughter and teamwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And better was a start. One evening, as the office lights dimmed, Nina sat at her desk reading an email from Karen. The subject line read, "Thank you for believing in me." The message was short but heartfelt. "Ms. Carter, I wanted you to know that our branch hosted a community event today. We opened free accounts for 20 small business owners who were struggling. It felt right. You inspired that." Nina smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. Redemption wasn't about apologies, it was about action. Later that week, she was invited to speak at a leadership summit in New York. The room was packed with CEOs, investors and professionals eager to hear her story firsthand. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She waited for it to fade, then began. "A few weeks ago, I walked into a bank I owned and was told I didn't belong. I could have gotten angry. I could have fired everyone involved. But instead, I chose to teach. Because when you fight ignorance with rage, it grows stronger. But when you fight it with grace, it disappears." The crowd fell silent, hanging onto her every word. We all talk about diversity as a business strategy, but it's not just about ticking boxes. It's about humanity. It's about remembering that behind every transaction, every desk, every title, there's a person with a story. And when you treat that story with respect, you build something money can't buy. Trust. Cameras flashed, hands clapped, and many stood up, moved to tears by her authenticity. Nina's message wasn't polished for PR. It was real, raw, and lived. After the speech, as she exited the hall, a little girl approached her shyly with her mother. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, holding a notebook and a pen. "Ms. Carter," she said softly, "I saw your story on TV. My teacher said you're the reason I want to be a boss one day." Nina knelt down, her eyes glistening. "You don't have to wait to be a boss, sweetheart. Just be brave, be kind, and never let anyone tell you you're less than enough." The girl grinned wide. "I won't." As they hugged, flashes went off around them, but Nina barely noticed. Moments like that was what made everything worth it. It wasn't about reputation or revenge. It was about planting seeds of confidence in the next generation, making sure no one else had to prove their worth the way she once did. That night, back home, she stood on her balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was calm, and the world below glimmered like 1,000 tiny possibilities. She thought of her journey, from the girl who once worked 3 jobs just to afford college, to the woman now leading one of the country's largest financial institutions. Every obstacle had taught her something. Every wound had shaped her wisdom. And now she knew exactly what her purpose was, not just to lead a bank, but to lead with heart. She picked up her phone, opened her social media, and posted a message that instantly went viral. "They tried to deny me a withdrawal, but what they didn't know was, I've been depositing strength my whole life." The post exploded with millions of likes and shares, each one echoing the power of perseverance and dignity. As the screen glowed in the night, she whispered to herself, "Let them know kindness is not weakness, it's power refined." And if you felt inspired by Nina's journey today, remember to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Tales Live, because every story we share reminds the world that no matter how dark the moment, kindness always wins in the end.